When we talk about recognizing the silent agreement with disrespect, what we're really naming is that unspoken contract trauma writes for us. It doesn't show up as a piece of paper or a conversation or a moment you clearly remember. It shows up in the tiny, repeated experiences that shape how you see yourself in the world. If you grew up in a home where your feelings were dismissed, or where love was inconsistent, or where chaos was the norm, your nervous system learned very quickly that survival depended on compliance. And compliance often meant tolerating things that hurt you. That agreement became invisible, tucked into your sense of normal, woven into your identity before you even had the language to challenge it. You didn't decide to accept disrespect, you were trained to, and the training was so effective it can feel like second nature. Think about the way a child adapts. Children are wired for connection above all else. When the people who are supposed to protect them are also the ones who minimize, dismiss, or even harm them, the child's brain doesn't say, "Oh, this isn't love." The child's brain says, "This must be what love looks like, and if I want to keep it, I'll adjust." That adjustment might mean staying quiet when you're hurt, downplaying your own needs, or ignoring the discomfort in your body when someone crosses a line. Over time, those adjustments become your baseline. By the time you're an adult, disrespect doesn't always register as danger, it registers as familiar, and familiarity feels safe even when it isn't. This silent agreement can show up in the smallest choices you make every day. Maybe it's laughing at a joke that actually cut deep because you don't want to look too sensitive. Maybe it's over-explaining yourself when you say no because you feel guilty for protecting your time. Maybe it's staying in relationships where you constantly feel unseen, unheard, or unvalued because some part of you has been trained to believe that this is the cost of love. The agreement isn't loud, but it is persistent. It whispers, "This is just how things are. Don't make a fuss. Don't expect more. Don't risk losing connection." What's so hard about recognizing this agreement is that it hides behind a mask of strength. Many of us who learn to accept disrespect also learn to wear resilience like armor. We tell ourselves, "I can handle it. It doesn't bother me. I'm fine." And sometimes we even take pride in our ability to tolerate what others can't. But resilience without boundaries is just endurance. And endurance is not the same as healing. The more you endure, the deeper that silent agreement burrows, convincing you that your capacity to absorb mistreatment is proof of your worth, when in reality, it's evidence of how deeply that trauma-trained pattern runs. Recognizing the agreement starts with awareness, and awareness is rarely comfortable. It means noticing the tension in your chest when someone interrupts you and asking why you let the moment pass. It means reflecting on the relationships in your life and asking whether you feel respected in them or whether you're just repeating an old script. It means being honest about the ways you downplay your own needs to keep the peace. These aren't easy questions because they press on the very places you've learned to numb. But awareness cracks open the door to choice. Once you can see the contract, you can begin to question it. It's important to understand that this agreement isn't your fault. It was formed in a context where you were doing the best you could with the tools you had. Your nervous system was brilliant in its ability to keep you safe. That brilliance doesn't disappear just because the environment has changed. The same strategies that once helped you survive can now keep you stuck, but only if you remain unaware of them. Recognition is about pulling those patterns out of the shadows and saying, "I see what's happening here." It's about acknowledging that what once protected you is now holding you back. Sometimes recognition comes in a sudden moment, like hearing someone else describe your exact experience and realizing you're not alone. Sometimes it's gradual, a slow unveiling where you start to notice all the little places you bend yourself to fit into spaces that don't honor you. Either way, the moment you begin to recognize the silent agreement, you create a possibility for something new. That possibility doesn't erase the past. It doesn't undo the training, but it does give you the power to ask a different question. What if disrespect doesn't have to be my normal? Reclaiming your self-worth as non-negotiable begins with untangling the lie that your value is conditional. For many people who have lived through trauma, worth was something you had to earn by being useful, by staying quiet, by not asking for too much, or by keeping others comfortable. Somewhere along the way, respect stopped being something you deserved automatically and became something you thought you had to barter for. That belief seeps into every corner of life. It shows up in your work, where you might overextend yourself to prove you belong. It shows up in friendships, where you might accept crumbs of attention and call it loyalty. It shows up in relationships, where you let people take more than they give because you've been taught that needing more makes you difficult. When self-worth is negotiable, every interaction feels like a test you could fail, and every misstep feels like evidence that you aren't enough. Reclaiming it means interrupting that script and declaring that worth isn't earned, it just is. One of the hardest parts about reclaiming self-worth is that you can't outsource it. You can't wait for someone else to affirm you in the right way or for a relationship to finally prove that you're lovable. External validation might feel good in the moment, but it can never be the foundation of your self-worth, because then it's still conditional. It's still negotiable. When you reclaim it, you start with yourself, and that's terrifying because it means being willing to see your own value even when no one else is pointing it out. It means reminding yourself that your needs are legitimate before anyone else validates them. It means showing up for yourself in the small daily ways, resting when you're tired, speaking up when something feels wrong, choosing not to explain yourself when your no should be enough. Those are the practices that begin to rebuild the muscle memory of worthiness. They're not glamorous, and they're often invisible to the outside world, but they're revolutionary in how they slowly shift the way you see yourself. When self-worth is treated as negotiable, you might also find yourself overcompensating, wearing masks to make sure people accept you. Maybe it's being the high achiever, always proving your competence. Maybe it's being the caretaker, always anticipating the needs of others while silencing your own. Maybe it's being the peacekeeper, smoothing over conflict even at the cost of your own truth. These roles aren't accidents. They're strategies designed to earn the respect and safety you weren't freely given. But over time, those strategies bury the authentic self under layers of performance. Reclaiming your worth means slowly peeling those layers back, noticing where you're performing and asking, who would I be if I didn't need to earn this? The answer might feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because authenticity requires letting go of control. It requires trusting that you are still worthy, even if you aren't endlessly achieving, endlessly giving, endlessly agreeable. Reclaiming self-worth as non-negotiable also involves confronting the fear of loss. Trauma trains you to believe that if you assert your value, you'll be abandoned, that if you draw a line, you'll be punished, that if you refuse disrespect, you'll end up alone. Those fears don't disappear just because you intellectually understand your worth. They live in your body, in your nervous system. So when you begin to reclaim your worth, the fear will rise up. You'll feel it when you say no to someone who is used to hearing yes. You'll feel it when you express a need you've always swallowed. You'll feel it when you walk away from situations that diminish you. The fear will scream, you'll lose everything. And in those moments, reclaiming worth means breathing through the fear instead of letting it dictate your choices. It means practicing the belief that the loss of disrespect is not the loss of love, even if it feels that way at first. There is also a quiet power in learning to separate your worth from your mistakes. When you're trained to negotiate your value, every failure feels catastrophic. Every misstep feels like proof that you don't deserve respect. But reclaiming self-worth means rewriting that equation. Mistakes become evidence of being human, not evidence of being unworthy. Disagreements become moments of growth, not confirmation that you don't belong. Imperfection becomes part of the fabric of your life, not a reason to disqualify yourself from love or dignity. That shift doesn't happen all at once, and it doesn't mean you stop caring about how you show up in the world. It simply means you stop letting every mistake put your entire worth on trial. It means you anchor your value so deeply in your being that no external circumstance, no failure, no rejection, no criticism can take it away. That is what it looks like when self-worth is no longer negotiable, when it is reclaimed as the foundation of who you are rather than the prize for who you think you need to be. Setting boundaries as acts of courage rather than punishment is one of the hardest but most transformative shifts we can make after trauma. So many of us grew up believing that boundaries were selfish, that saying no meant we were ungrateful, difficult, or unloving. When you've been trained to equate love with tolerance, the idea of drawing a line can feel like rejection or even cruelty. But boundaries are not walls. They are doors. They are the way you protect your energy, your values, and your dignity while still allowing for genuine connection. To set a boundary is to declare, this is who I am, this is what I need, and this is how I deserve to be treated. That declaration requires courage because it risks disappointing people, it risks confrontation, and it risks change. Yet the absence of boundaries creates something far riskier: relationships built on resentment, depletion, and quiet self-betrayal. For people who carry trauma, boundaries can feel almost impossible because they require you to believe you're worth protecting. If you've internalized the idea that your needs don't matter, saying no can feel like breaking some unspoken contract. The fear that follows is not imagined, it is stored in the body. Your nervous system remembers what happened when you tried to speak up in the past. Maybe you were ignored, maybe you were shamed, maybe you were punished. That memory gets activated in the present, making even the smallest boundary feel like a threat to safety. This is why setting boundaries isn't just an intellectual exercise, it's a deeply embodied act of bravery. Your hands may shake, your voice may falter, your heart may race, and still choosing to hold the line is how you begin to rewire the belief that your worth is tied to how much you can endure. The reframe that boundaries are acts of courage, not punishment, shifts everything. Punishment says, you did something wrong and now I'm cutting you off. Courage says, I love myself enough to protect my energy, and I love you enough to be clear about what I need. That's a radically different posture. It removes the shame from the equation and replaces it with responsibility. When you set a boundary, you're not trying to control the other person. You're taking ownership of your own choices. You're saying, I can't control how you act, but I can decide what I allow into my space. That clarity is not only a gift to yourself, it's also a gift to others. People don't have to guess where they stand with you. They don't have to navigate unspoken resentment or hidden expectations. Boundaries bring honesty into the room, and honesty is the foundation of trust. Of course, courage doesn't mean ease. The first boundaries you set might feel clumsy or even harsh. You might overcompensate, swinging from saying yes to everything to suddenly saying no to everyone. You might second-guess yourself, lying awake at night, replaying the conversation and wondering if you were too much, too cold, too unkind. That's part of the process. Boundaries are skills, not instincts. They are muscles you build over time, and like any new practice, they require repetition and patience. What matters is not perfection, but persistence, the willingness to keep showing up for yourself even when it feels messy. Over time, the discomfort fades, and what once felt terrifying begins to feel natural. You stop rehearsing the apology in your head and start trusting that your no is valid on its own. As boundaries become a part of your daily life, something powerful happens. You begin to see how they transform your relationships. The people who only benefited from your lack of boundaries may resist, push back, or even fall away. That can feel like loss, but it is also clarity. The people who truly care for you, who value you as you are, will adjust. They will respect your lines because they want to stay connected, not because you bend yourself to make it easy for them. And in that space, intimacy grows. Real intimacy requires boundaries because without them, there is no authenticity. If you're always performing comfort while secretly feeling resentful, that's not connection, that's compliance. Boundaries invite people into a relationship with the real you, not the version of you trained to accommodate. That kind of connection is deeper, healthier, and more sustainable, and it begins the moment you choose courage over silence. Rewriting the story your trauma taught you is about more than positive thinking or repeating affirmations in the mirror. It is about challenging the core narrative that shaped your sense of self and your place in the world. Trauma often leaves behind a script, a set of unspoken lines you carry without even realizing it. Maybe that script says, I am only lovable if I'm useful. Maybe it says, if I stand up for myself, I will lose everything. Maybe it says, I have to shrink who I am to be accepted. These aren't just thoughts. They are deep grooves in the brain and body that were carved in moments of survival. They influence the way you show up in relationships, the way you react to conflict, the way you tolerate disrespect, and even the way you see your own potential. To rewrite the story, you first have to see it clearly. You have to name the lines that were handed to you by pain and recognize that just because the script feels familiar doesn't mean it's true. This process of rewriting often begins with awareness in the everyday moments. When you hesitate to ask for help because you believe you'll be a burden, that's the old story speaking. When you stay silent during an argument because you believe conflict means abandonment, that's the old story speaking. When you tolerate behavior that leaves you feeling small because you believe it's the price of connection, that's the old story speaking. These moments can feel ordinary, but they're actually the places where the trauma narrative tries to repeat itself. Catching them requires mindfulness, slowing down enough to notice the thought, naming it as part of the old script, and then asking yourself whether you want to keep reciting it. That pause between the trigger and the response is where rewriting begins. It doesn't have to be dramatic or loud. It starts with the quiet decision to respond differently, even in the smallest ways. Rewriting also requires imagination, the ability to picture a different story even when you've never lived it before. For many trauma survivors, envisioning respect, equality, or unconditional love can feel almost impossible because there's no lived reference point. That's why imagination is such a radical act. It says, even if I haven't experienced this yet, I can still create it. Imagination allows you to test out new lines for your story. I am worthy of care without proving myself. I can be loved without abandoning my needs. Conflict can be navigated without losing connection. At first, those lines might feel foreign, even fake. They might catch in your throat because your body isn't used to believing them. But repetition matters. Every time you practice imagining and speaking a new story, you carve a new groove in your brain. Over time, those grooves become more familiar, and the old script loses some of its power. It's also important to understand that rewriting your story doesn't mean erasing the old one. Trauma happened, pain happened. Denying it doesn't make it go away, it just pushes it deeper into the shadows. Rewriting is about holding both truths. Yes, this story was given to me through experiences that hurt me, and yes, I have the power to write a new one that honors me. You don't need to pretend that the old script never existed. You only need to stop letting it dictate the choices you make today. Sometimes that means grieving the years you spent believing a story that kept you small. Sometimes it means honoring the younger version of yourself who did the best they could with that script. And sometimes it means celebrating the moments when you catch yourself choosing a new line, no matter how imperfectly. Healing is not about pretending the past didn't matter. It's about refusing to let the past have the final word. As you begin to rewrite the story, you'll notice that your relationships start to shift. People who were comfortable with the old version of you may struggle when you stop reciting the same lines. If your old story kept you agreeable, Always saying yes, those around you might resist when you start saying no. If your old story kept you quiet, some may not know how to handle your voice. That discomfort is part of the rewriting process because your new story requires new dynamics. It invites relationships that can handle honesty, respect, and equality, and it naturally weeds out the ones that can't. This isn't about being cruel or cutting people off. It's about aligning your connections with the story you're choosing now. And while it can feel disorienting at first, it also brings freedom. The freedom to live from a narrative rooted in truth, dignity, and possibility, rather than one dictated by trauma. Practicing self-compassion while unlearning is often the most overlooked but most essential part of this entire journey. When you begin to shift out of patterns that trauma ingrained in you, the process is rarely clean or linear. You'll notice yourself slipping back into old behaviors, agreeing to things you didn't want, silencing yourself when you meant to speak up, or tolerating disrespect even after promising yourself you wouldn't. Without self-compassion, those moments become ammunition for shame. The voice of self-criticism will rush in to say, "See, you'll never change. You're still the same person who puts up with everything." But with self-compassion, those same moments become opportunities to acknowledge your humanity. They become reminders that growth takes time, that learning to choose differently is a practice, not a performance. Self-compassion interrupts the cycle of shame and gives you the space to try again without abandoning yourself in the process. When trauma has trained you to be harsh with yourself, extending compassion inward can feel almost impossible. Many survivors are skilled at empathy for others, but ruthless when it comes to their own mistakes. You may find yourself giving endless grace to the people around you, but when you falter, your inner critic shreds you apart. That double standard is not accidental. It's part of the survival script. If you were conditioned to believe your needs didn't matter, then turning compassion inward feels dangerous, like breaking a rule you've lived by for years. Yet self-compassion is precisely what begins to untangle that conditioning. It means speaking to yourself the way you would speak to a friend, replacing the question, "What's wrong with me?" with, "What do I need right now?" That shift doesn't erase the mistake or make the discomfort go away, but it softens the edges. It creates enough safety inside yourself to keep moving forward instead of freezing in shame or backsliding into old patterns. Self-compassion also requires patience with the nervous system. Unlearning trauma responses isn't just about changing thoughts. It's about rewiring the body's reaction to stress, conflict, and intimacy. When you feel triggered, your body often reverts to the old ways of coping, shutting down, people-pleasing, or fighting back. Without compassion, it's easy to judge yourself for these reactions, to believe you're failing because you still feel the pull of old patterns. But compassion allows you to see those moments as the nervous system doing its best to protect you. Instead of labeling yourself as weak or broken, you can acknowledge, "My body is trying to keep me safe the only way it knows how." From that place, you can practice new strategies, breathing, grounding, reaching out for support without layering shame on top of the trigger. Each time you choose compassion in those moments, you reinforce the message that you deserve care even when you're struggling. The practice of self-compassion also shows up in the way you allow yourself to rest. Trauma often teaches people to stay on high alert, to keep hustling, to prove their worth through constant effort. That drive can make rest feel unearned or even unsafe. Yet rest is not a luxury, it's a necessity for healing. When you practice compassion, you give yourself permission to pause without guilt, to recharge without labeling yourself lazy or weak. Rest becomes an act of defiance against the old narrative that said you had to keep performing in order to be valuable. It becomes a declaration that your worth is not tied to productivity and that caring for yourself is as legitimate as caring for others. That shift is radical because it replaces self neglect with self nourishment, teaching your mind and body that you are worthy of care simply because you exist. In the long run, self compassion creates resilience that is sustainable. Without it, the work of unlearning becomes a punishing grind. You're constantly measuring yourself against an impossible standard of perfection, and every setback feels like proof of failure. With compassion, the work becomes a practice of returning to yourself over and over again, no matter how many times you slip. You learn to hold yourself with gentleness during the stumbles and with pride during the breakthroughs. You begin to trust that even in the messiest moments of growth, you are still worthy of kindness. That trust doesn't make the unlearning easy, but it does make it possible. It gives you the courage to stay in the process, to keep choosing respect over disrespect, to keep practicing boundaries, to keep rewriting your story, because you know that no matter what happens, you will not abandon yourself again.